ears to show you that there's something in me. I'm not giving up, I'm standing right here holding these days hostage, and I'll make this my year. We turning fear into love, and the love's in the air. I love doing this cause nothing compares, nothing can share that same type of feeling when you feeling and flare. They can't catch it, it's havoc. I rip to a tear, switch the scenario, my stereos, I leave them impaired. Variables start to change and they're all in my range. I just gotta grab it, it's all mathematics. Every step is drastic, I make it fantastic. I'm trying to take your breath away, asthmatic.
This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo.
Yeah, just nod your head with it, so explicit and vivid. Every image is intricate, intimate. I put my all into it, no scrimmage and no rules. I'm a pro tool, hear my heartbeat, beat into the vocals. I'm so loco, lost my mind, oh no. It's ponderoso, dope, so no overdose, cause it's dope, yo. Man, this is house grown, mixed with some milestones. So I let the style flow down like the Dow Jones, bringing it with some foul tones, letting the crowd know we getting loud, so it's eardrum rudiments. Yeah, we bring it rude again. Move, little hooligan. Music for tuning in, full time to the 10. I'm on my clock like I told you. I'm doing this for dreams we pursuing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anti-Media Radio Show. Once again with your host Nick Bernabe here on ucy.tv and the antimedia.org/radio. Thank you all for coming back, and I'm really happy to be back and alive and well in these very interesting and crazy times, because that's just a regular occurrence now. Every single day is this insane, crazy news day. In fact, today was one of the more slower days, not because there wasn't news going on, but because it seems like maybe all this crap, all this Russia stuff about them putting Trump in power is kind of slowing down. But there's a huge amount of things going on foreign policy, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight on the Anti-Media Radio, because there's so much to cover, and it's just there's not enough being talked about in the mainstream media about the foreign policy, because they're too busy focusing on Comey and trying to blame Russia for Hillary Clinton losing the election and all these other things going on. Well, there may be something to all that stuff. However, the one constant which you'll see between George Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump is this neoconservative foreign policy where we've got wars going on all over the world that just never seem to slow down, and they just keep advancing, and we just keep bombing more countries over supposedly fighting against ISIS in more and more countries. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We've got an awesome panel put together. We're probably going to be joined by our co-host, DB Schwartz, in a little bit as well. First of all, our co-host, Jake Anderson. What's up, Jake? How you doing tonight, man?
Hey, good, Nick. How are you?
Oh, hanging in there, dude. Just, again, following the crazy developments on foreign policy. Did you know that we're now in the Philippines? We got guys fighting. I mean, of course, we've had a military presence there for a while, but now we have guys in there helping the Filipino military fight against ISIS on the ground. So this is stuff that you don't really see. You're not going to see it on CNN. You're not going to see it on TV. But we're now active in yet another country, actively, quote unquote, advising. Sooner or later turns into us just having troops on the ground fighting. But yet another country, dude. I mean, it's getting crazy, right?
Pretty. Seems like a regular occurrence that the American people don't seem to care. They don't, there's pretty much no resistance, public resistance to wars of aggression anymore.
Yeah, and that's extremely troubling. Extremely troubling. Now, there's something really nasty going on in Raqqa right now. And elsewhere in Iraq, with the U.S.'s fight against ISIS and stuff like that, we're resorting to some really nasty tactics, and the worst of which, I guess, we're going to be talking about tonight, is what is going on with white phosphorus. And this is just, a really, really nasty chemical. And I don't know if you can really technically call it a chemical weapon, but it's more or less a chemical weapon. I guess that's still being debated. But now we're getting reports that the U.S. is using it over populated areas. But I guess, people have said that this would constitute a war crime. Joining us tonight to talk about what's going on with this use of white phosphorus, we've got Trey Yarnall, who is a friend of mine on Facebook, who has been following our work for a while, and he volunteered to come on and talk with us and give us his take on white phosphorus. And also joining us is Justin King, longtime journalist with the Anti-Media and purveyor of the Fifth Column, and a bunch of other projects. And as well, Justin, you got a bunch of experience with this military stuff going on. So let's go to Justin first. I mean, what do you make of these reports of white phosphorus? I was looking into it, and under from what I could tell, using it in a populated area actually constitutes a war crime. And when the United States commits war crimes, you would hope that you would find out about them in the media, or that you would get reporting, or it would be kind of a big deal, because we go to other countries and we fight with other countries because they're supposedly committing atrocities and stuff. But I mean, Justin, is this a war crime? Should this be a much bigger deal than it is, or are we kind of is it just a normal thing and they're just using it how it's supposed to be used? What do you think?
Okay. Well, first, white phosphorus it's an incendiary, and it can be used legally in civilian areas. There's a bunch of ways. It can't be used against civilian areas is the key as far as legality. And the whole thing about them arguing about whether or not it's a chemical weapon, it's kind of a song and dance. We need to get that out of the way first, because we are a party to a whole bunch of international treaties related to the use of incendiaries, which is what it really is. So that they're creating this argument that literally does not matter. It is illegal to use it against civilian areas. So the question is, was it used against civilian areas? From what I'm looking at, from everything that I've seen, yeah, it's almost indisputable. I can't think of any way that they could know that that area was no longer populated by civilians. And I find it highly unlikely that it was. The route that they're using, this smoke screen story, yes, that's one of white phosphorus' primary uses. However, when you're doing that, you don't airburst it, which is what they did in those photos and in that video and all of that. It wasn't used as a smokescreen. That's a complete lie. There's no truth to that whatsoever.
I mean, I was thinking, if they were truly using it as a smoke screen, it would be more like kind of like a smoke grenade where it's on the floor and it's letting smoke out, so you get cover for your guys running in. Right?
Well, most smoke grenades are actually made with white phosphorus. But again, it's done differently. What this is it's an artillery shell. It comes in, blows up in the air. I think 116 little pizza slice shaped wedges shoot out, and that's what you see burning as it falls. It sets fire to stuff, and yes, it creates smoke, but that's not its primary use. Its primary use is to light things on fire.
Sounds like something really nasty. And I've seen some photos of people who have been, who have had this stuff land on them, and it's like, imagine a piece of burning hot, like a huge piece of the end of a match, landing on your skin, and then you can't get it off. It just starts burning through you, and that's more or less, from what I could tell from the pictures I've seen of victims that have been hit by this stuff. That's basically what it looked like. It lands on you, gets stuck to you, and then it burns the hole right through you.
Right. It burns at around 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For your viewers, white phosphorus will melt steel beams. So it will. It's above the point to melt still. So.
Oh man, this is some nasty stuff. So we got an article up on the Anti-Media. U.S.-led forces now using white phosphorus in populated areas of Syria and Iraq. And yeah, you look at the pictures and stuff that we have here in the videos, it looks like they're using it over places that look like neighborhoods. So this is really, really bad. The article we have hosted up it's by antiwar.com, which obviously they do a lot of great foreign policy coverage. So according to antiwar.com's reporting, Iraq is taking credit for the use of the white phosphorus, but of course Mosul is a U.S. I guess it's a U.S.-led offensive. And so Mosul, for those not familiar, is a huge city in Iraq. I think it's the third biggest city. It's home to nearly 1 million people. I don't know how many people are there now after, ISIS has been occupying the city for a couple of years now. But, there's a lot of people there. And so this has always been a very dangerous operation from the start, Now, if you look back a couple months of reporting, you look at what was going on in Aleppo, and you'll see that how much media coverage was there about Aleppo and how Aleppo was like this horrible atrocity, and Russia was going in and committing war crimes and killing like all kinds of people, laying siege to an entire city with a huge population. I don't dispute those claims. I think Russia was probably doing most of that stuff. However, when the U.S. is now leading a campaign which is very, very similar to Aleppo. In fact, Mosul is actually a bigger city at this point as far as when it comes to the amount of people under siege. It's really just like, it's not talked about. Like, this is the thing that really drives me nuts, is that American media companies do not cover what the American military is doing. But when Russia was doing it in Syria, it was daily headline news. Every single day, it's Aleppo, 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 Aleppo. The famously, Gary Johnson couldn't remember the name of Aleppo. Aleppo was a big, major story day after day after day after day. Yet Mosul is going on. U.S. is the one leading it. You would think, well, if America's leading it, you'd think the American media would take interest in this story, but it's not. We're not hearing anything about Mosul. And this is very, very troubling. And the fact now, unfortunately, it took something like white phosphorus to gain the attention of people. But now I think people are finally like, holy shit, wait, what's going on in Mosul? And the U.S. is dropping white phosphorus? It's crazy. It's crazy. Let me bring in Trey. Trey, I asked Trey how he wanted me to introduce him, and he said, well, I'm basically a 19-year-old anarchist. So we're going to go with that. And Trey, I want to get your opinion, dude. As like a younger guy, seeing this foreign policy stuff going on, and let me just quickly remind you that in one way or another, you're probably paying for this stuff, as like the rest of us. We're all paying for this stuff. I mean, Trey, what do you think about this? How does it make you feel?
Well, it's deeply troubling for me, honestly, because the fact that we're being lied to day in and day out, like Justin said, we're being told it was used as a smokescreen. It's obviously not being used as a smokescreen with the photos and videos we're being seen from these places. So it's deeply troubling for me seeing this and seeing that we are paying for these civilians to get hurt and maimed and in some cases more often than not killed by our military. And for, like you said, the same things we demonize other countries for the U.S. to do it. And it's the whole attitude of American exceptionalism where if someone else does something, it's the worst thing on the planet and we should damn them all to hell and throw sanctions on them and all this stuff. While we do the same thing, but it's not reported on or it's dumbed down or made to look not that bad. I actually had a history teacher tell me, I brought something up. I forget exactly what it was. I had brought some subject up in class. He's like, oh, I can't talk about that. Because it's this whole attitude of American exceptionalism where we can do things that everyone else isn't allowed to. So it's really troubling for me seeing my generation being the next to have to go through this, where this is setting a very dangerous precedent to where if we can keep doing things and nobody else can, then where are other countries going to think that they have to stop, you know? So it's...
Yeah, that's an interesting viewpoint, and you bring up a great point. I mean, when was the last time North Korea used white phosphorus? When was the last time North Korea used chemical weapons? When was the last time North Korea overthrew somebody's government? These are all questions that really don't have an answer because those have probably never been done that we know of. I mean, maybe they've used chemical weapons against their own people. I doubt it, but maybe it's happened. We just don't know about it. But as far as we know, public record, North Korea hasn't done any of that stuff. Yet at the same time, they're developing missiles again. Who they've never used them on anybody. They're developing missile technology, and it's like headline news every day. It's like, oh, North Korea attacked the ocean again with a bomb that didn't beforehand. And it's like, oh, I can't believe North Korea shot an empty missile into an empty ocean where nobody was at. It's so bad. Yeah. It's horrible. And then it's like our own government is dropping white phosphorus over populated areas in Iraq and Syria, and we're supposed to either not care to know about it, or if you know about it, we're doing it for freedom and democracy, and we're actually doing it. We're dropping white phosphorus for a good reason.
Yeah, that's what gets me is the whole, like, we're made to think it's a good thing, and so many people don't care enough to either go do research themselves and see that what we're doing is actually terrible and more often than not committing war crimes, or they just don't watch the news and don't even pay attention to anything and therefore aren't being even slightly educated as to what's going on in the world. So, especially people my age. So
a lot of people are either like they're under the spell of misinformation, or they just didn't know about it at all and they're apathetic to it. So Justin, I want to go back to you and kind of get your take, dude, on, like, you know, what do you think this is actually a war crime? And if so, what should we try to do about it? I mean, we're going to have to go the route of activism and try to get marches and rallies going, which are notoriously in the U.S., especially recently, really hard to get together. It's hard to get anyone to give a shit about foreign policy. Like Jake was saying, no one really gives a shit. It's so weird. It's so strange. When it was Bush, it was like a big deal. Now with Trump, you know, it's a Republican. I honestly, when I saw Trump coming in, I was like, you know, the best thing about Trump's presidency is going to be liberals are going to give a shit about foreign policy again. That's what I really thought. And now I'm seeing what's going on here is liberals they don't want to give a shit about being, non-interventionist on foreign policy. In fact, they're like wanting to do something against Russia. It's so crazy the way that they've been able to shift the conversation, the paradigm. Justin, I mean, is it a war crime? And if it is, what do we do about it?
I think it probably is. I mean, when people say war crime, a lot of times it's exaggerated because there are a lot of things that are technically war crimes, but it's also war and things are going to happen. This isn't, some 19-year-old corporal opening fire and hitting, a school bus. This is a deliberate attack. I'd like to see footage from the other side of Mosul or the reports coming out first before I said for certain. But from the video, yeah, it's a war crime. Sometimes the lights can play tricks and maybe it was further away from the city than it appeared. But I don't think that's likely, especially with the story they put out. The story they put out is what makes me had they said nothing, I wouldn't be so convinced that it was a war crime. But what they put out is just not accurate. It's not the way that's used. The original statement was something, well, we were trying to keep ISIS contained. That I can believe. They were trying to build a wall of fire between them and the area they were going. The smoke screen as a way of containing them is not it's just not true. So I do think it's a war crime. More than likely. I'd like to see a little bit more evidence, but I definitely think it's worth pursuing. As far as what do we do about it, honestly, I don't think that this is a winning fight. I don't think that we're going to be able to do much. These type of weapons, they exist. They're out there. They're going to be used, and they're going to be used incorrectly. We might, if you pursued it through a legal course, you might be able to stop it from happening again. But as far as this battle, if they're going to use it and they think that this is the way to do it, I can't imagine why they do, but they're going to do it. We've got some real idiots in charge now in the command structure, and they're doing a lot of stupid stuff. This is the type of thing that breeds ISIS fighters. We've got a whole bunch of conventional military generals, people that were designed or trained, and they think in the manner of armored columns and infantry battalions, and they're fighting an unconventional war, and it's getting people killed. But I don't have a plan. I don't know that there is one that's actually going to be able to stop this.
Like you said, Justin, I mean, I don't know if you were when you said it's a losing battle. I don't know if it's us trying to stop it as activists or the war in general, or both. I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like it's a little bit of both here. Obviously, we're fighting a war that is just it's getting worse and worse. We've been fighting a war on terror since 2001. And terrorism has expanded, and now they actually hold down territory. ISIS is the first quote-unquote terror group to be holding down like big, large areas of actual territory. Keep in mind, Taliban was never really a terrorist group. It was more of a kind of a theocracy over in Afghanistan. They weren't really a terror group until we drove them out of power and forced them into a guerrilla war. Al-Qaeda, before ISIS, they never really held, like, you couldn't really say, oh, yeah, that city is held by Al-Qaeda. They would just blow up, light off bombs in cities and make attacks and stuff like that. But ISIS is, the first terror group to hold large areas of countries. Now they're expanding into the Philippines. But all of this war, all these trillions of dollars of the war on terror have been spent in vain, it appears, because now, as much as we fight, it just grows and grows and grows, and we can try to stomp it out in northern Iraq, and then it sprouts up in the Philippines, and then we try to put it down in Syria, and it sprouts up in Afghanistan. And so these guys, like you said, they're fighting a conventional war, dropping white phosphorus over top of neighborhoods against guys that are guerrilla fighters. Where the hell are they? You're not even dropping them. You don't even know that you're dropping them on their positions.
Mm-hmm. And more importantly, their position isn't theirs. Mm-hmm. They don't care if it burns to the ground. They just move and take somebody else's. These are the same mistakes we made during Vietnam. The Viet Cong were a formidable force that engaged in a strategy that we couldn't counter. And we learned from the mistakes of Vietnam, and we developed entire doctrines on how to deal with this. And they're good doctrines, but we're not using them. And it's baffling to somebody like me who was trained in these doctrines to just see them kind of tossed aside. And it's infuriating because there's no reason for this many people to be dead. But
Justin, I've asked you this question before, and I'm expecting a similar answer. Are these guys simply incompetent, or are they purposely not trying to win?
I don't know anymore, man. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are commanders that know what they're doing, and they're being pushed out. They're being disciplined for the way they speak. There's a bunch of stuff that's going on that just blows my mind. Yeah. So I don't know.
And then I'm going to go back to Trey after this. But first I wanted to ask you, because, look, last time I asked you that question, you said it's a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not exactly trying to win, and the other half is that, yeah, they're at least partially incompetent. And I tend to agree with that sentiment. But answer me this. fighting a war how they're fighting now with conventional arms and dropping a bunch of bombs and dropping artillery and moving armored personnel and armored carriers and tanks and all that shit around. There's that, and then there's fighting a truly effective. If you were going to fight a truly effective counter-terror campaign, which one is more profitable? I mean, where do you spend more resources?
Okay, well, here's a truly effective counter-terror campaign against a group like ISIS. You're talking about, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 teams of 12 guys and a lot of intelligence resource and very, very few bullets. To do it effectively, you assassinate the command and control, the good ones, and you leave the idiots behind. And then the organization's ran by idiots. They can't get funding, and they just kind of disintegrate. It's been used, and it works. So that doesn't make a lot of money for defense contractors. In fact, the Tomahawk missile strike thing, I guarantee you that would fund those operations for a year. That one day, that one operation would fund worldwide operations for a year. So it is definitely more profitable for defense contractors for us to bomb, civilians into oblivion in hopes of making them like us and fight for us. I don't. The strategy just doesn't make any sense.
It really doesn't. It doesn't make sense. And that's what really concerns me a lot, is that it doesn't make sense. And the more likely scenario, the more honest scenario anyway. Because I think the guys over there, I guess they're probably they are believing that they're fighting against ISIS, but it definitely looks like to me like they aren't as concerned with truly stopping ISIS as they are more concerned with first toppling or destabilizing the Syrian government, which just at this point doesn't seem like it's going to happen. It doesn't seem like it's going to be successful. Russia stepped in, and Russia. See, there's a big difference, I think, between what the U.S. and what Russia are doing in that region. Now, did they both commit atrocities? Yes. Russia committed atrocities in Aleppo, and the United States is committing atrocities right now in Mosul. In that aspect, they're pretty similar. But what's different is that Russia is more honest, I think, about its intentions there, and it's honestly saying we're going to prop up the Syrian government, and everyone else is a terrorist, and whoever is against the Syrian government, we're going to try to kill them. The United States, on the other hand, is saying, well, we're going to go over there. We're not going to fight against any country. We're only going to fight against ISIS, but at the same time, we're going to be sympathetic towards Syrian rebels who are trying to fight the Syrian government. We're not against the Syrian government, but it'd be nice if they were gone. And so this is, I think, at the very top of the problem here. Just right off the top of it, it's like we're not being truthful or honest, or at least, clear about what we're trying to accomplish over there. And that's why Russia was able to step in, prop up the Syrian government, knock out the rebels out of Aleppo, take back Aleppo, and now the Syrian government is looking like it's not gonna go away. It's gonna stay.
Right. And the way the Russians did it by moving in, and they did exactly what you're supposed to do. They moved in, they took out command and control, they paved the way, and then they let the indigenous, the Syrian forces move in and take the city. They got all, they get the credit. The Syrian government did this. At no point did Russia invade. That they helped their allies, but they always made sure that at the end of the day, it was Syria that got credit. And that's the way it needs to be played, because then there's no claim of, oh, well, it's a jihad. They're coming here as another crusade, and they're coming to take us. Because the Russians never occupied anything. The Syrians did. Mm-hmm. And that's how it should be done. But again, tell that to the Pentagon.
Yeah, something needs to change. Jake, do you got any thoughts on this before I go back to Trey? And then we're going to broaden this out a little bit, because there's a lot of stuff going on over in the Middle East right now that just simply is not being talked about enough. So, Jake, you got any thoughts on this?
Not really. That hasn't been addressed. I would say, I would say that's one of the big questions of our age. Is as Orwell said, the point is not to win the war, but to keep the war going.
Right.
And it certainly seems like for the last 15, 16 years, the idea has been to keep the war going and just bomb the shit and destabilize the shit out of every country we can to ensure that new terrorist groups and new terrorists are going to keep rising up and keeping people scared and providing a justification for the state to become more draconian in a number of different ways. It just seems like I don't see how it's not obvious to everyone, but I'm glad to be talking with people who see it for what it is.
Jake, what do you think this is sustainable? Like, can we keep going at this rate? Are people going to are Americans finally going to, at one point, like, where in the hell is all this money going? And then they look and are they finally going to one day realize, shit, we just spent, I don't know, maybe by the time people realize, maybe it'll be $10 trillion. Because right now I think we're around 6 or 7 trillion that we spent on the war on terror. Are they one day going to say, you know what, this is unsustainable and we can't allow this to go on, or are we going to let this shit bankrupt us?
I think it'll be fine because, we've already, in terms of lives lost, the war on terror has already equaled Vietnam in terms of the low-end estimates of people killed during Vietnam. The difference is that the casualties are on the other side, and America is not losing its troops to the war on terror. But 1.3 million people have been killed in the Middle East from the war on terror, and that number is just going to keep going up and up and up, and the money is going to keep going up. If people haven't risen up by now, I don't think it's going to happen. We're dead. The American populace is dead. They failed, and new measures are going to have to be drawn up in order to drill into people's head that we're committing war crimes.
Well, I'm not ready to give up hope yet.
I'm not giving up hope. I'm just saying that the tactics we're using. These are everything that we're doing is important, but there is clearly some deeply deep cognitive dissonance going on that is preventing the mainstream from acknowledging this emotionally in any capacity whatsoever.
Yeah, man, I agree with you, dude. And hopefully, to brighten up our spirits, we're gonna talk to Trey and see what 19-year-olds are thinking about with this war on terror. I mean, are you guys starting to feel like this whole thing is bogus and it's just they just want to keep these wars going, or are people your age like, yeah, totally, we're fighting war on terror, totally justified, we got to keep it going? Trey, what do you think?
I don't know. It's kind of interesting for me to look because back when I was in high school and I was sort of like talking to people and I would engage in debates with people, and I was surprised at the amount of people who would come up to me and either understand my viewpoint or get what I'm saying, or there are like 10 to 12 people that I went to high school with that had been super just let the government do their thing, and now are almost as anarchist as I am because they've like totally woken up to the idea. I don't know. I read somewhere that it only takes 10% of you only have to get 10% of the population to start getting major social change. So
yeah, you need 10% of people to like strongly believe in something for it to start to become mainstream.
Yeah, so I think if we can get there, I think we'll be able to do it. But I think it goes back to the fact that we have these divisive leaders in power like Donald Trump and everything. Because if we had someone in power like who wanted to bring everyone together, wanted to end all this, we wouldn't even be in this position, But we keep having these divisive leaders in power, and they're elected. So I think that says a lot about the American populace as, like, we voted for someone who said he would destroy ISIS in 30 days. Everyone knew that was not possible and wasn't going to happen, but we voted for him. So I think it goes back to where the hearts and minds of Americans are at as far as if this is ever going to happen. Because if we keep electing these divisive leaders and keep just looking for conflict at every turn and keep hyping up our military like it's the biggest, baddest toy we've ever had, we're not going to get anywhere. But I think if we can wake people up to the fact that we are killing women, children, and civilians, we are not fighting terror, we are fighting for profit. If we can wake people up to all these things and get enough people to either stop paying taxes or stop joining the military, then, I mean, we might see some change, but I think we'll have to see a large-scale, I don't want to use the word revolution, but I don't see it coming to an end any other way. But to go back to the root of your question, I think a lot of people my age are waking up to what's going on. I think it's definitely more so in my age than many other age groups. But, yeah, I have a group of 6 or 8 close friends of mine that we're all in the same boat, just trying to educate other people our age, wake them up to what's going on. And so I think there's hope, but it's just, do we have enough time left?
Well, that's awesome, dude. Just telling me about your group of friends brightened up my spirits a little bit. But, here's the thing. When I was a freshman in high school, that's when 9/11 happened. And I remember when I went into school that day, every single classroom that I was in, the teacher pulled up the TV and we were watching 9/11 coverage all day. Like, people, millennials, are brainwashed like hell in the war on terror.
Oh, yeah.
And for us,
absolutely.
The ones of us who have broken out of that, kudos to them. Like, you guys, people who are millennials that have broken out of that whole, the war on terror is just a necessity mind frame. That takes a lot. I mean, it takes a lot to break out of those mental, that mental programming, because a lot of time and effort was put into that. And so a lot of people my age and older are basically, I think a lot of them are kind of a lost cause. Think about our parents and our grandparents. They're all were brought up in Cold War propaganda. Mm-hmm. And all of the people my age are caught up in the war on terror stuff. There's a lot of propaganda going on. And that's why I feel like younger people are really the next big hope. People, that were too young to remember 9/11 and all the propaganda that followed it, like directly after, because there was a lot of propaganda, anti-Muslim, Islamophobic propaganda that was sown by the New York Times and Washington Post. And then now, when Donald Trump runs a campaign on, what many people would say an Islamophobic presidential campaign, and then the Washington Post and New York Times are coming out with articles like, "I can't believe Donald Trump is running on an Islamophobic campaign." Those same outlets have been sowing the seeds of Islamophobia since really sadly. And so it's a bunch of hypocrisy there. And they're like, Donald Trump won because he capitalized on all the propaganda from CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, Fox News, NBC, all the propaganda they've been doing since 9/11. Donald Trump, all he did was capitalize on that.
Well, and Hillary imploding her own campaign, but...
and then the Democrats running the...
Hillary, what are you talking about? She's a national treasure.
At least we can all laugh on that, right?
Oh my
God. We should have a petrified wood monument of her on the White House lawn.
Oh my God.
Oh man, the termites would have a field day on that. All right, so what's going on in Iraq and Syria, and the U.S.-backed forces, and maybe even the U.S. itself. Maybe the U.S. is the one shooting these things off. We don't know yet. With the white phosphorus, that's terrible. And I'm the only thing I'm glad about on that is that now it's gotten the attention of people, because white phosphorus, even if people don't know what it is, just looking at the images and the videos, it's like, what the hell is that? And it gets people's attention. And so if we can draw attention to that, what we're doing over there, hopefully that will start getting people on the mindset, like Trey was saying, getting people to wake up and just pay attention to what the hell is going on, because it's not nice. But that being said, we got our troops now activating in the Philippines, and then we got this big schism going on between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And so this, I think, is very, very interesting, and it's very big. The United States has a very, very big military base inside of Qatar, and then now Trump was on Twitter talking all kinds of shit about Qatar. So this is something that could be turned into a very sticky situation really quickly. And of course, Qatar is a very small country that borders directly on Saudi Arabia. I think if Saudi Arabia wanted to invade them and stuff, I don't know. I don't know if it would be that big of a, I don't know if it would be that hard for Saudi Arabia to overtake Qatar because it's so small. I want to get Justin's insight on this because this is a very complex situation over there in that region with the Sunni states and the Gulf region. I mean, what do you make of this whole Qatar-Saudi Arabia schism?
During the Desert Storm, we were told that Saddam Hussein was going to take Kuwait, and then he was going to take part of Saudi Arabia. Then he was, that it was a domino theory type thing. I think Qatar is going to be right after Yemen. I think that I think they're setting the stage for an intervention.
But my question is, when is after Yemen? Because it seems like Saudi Arabia can't even win in Yemen. And Yemen is basically a country, the poorest country in the world, very little resources, no military. All they have is these guys called the Houthi rebels, which I guess are more or less a big militia that are defeating the Saudis.
Well, they made the same mistake that everybody makes. They seem to think that just because they're poor that they'll roll over quickly without the technology. I mean, I watched a video with the Houthis. They took a T-72 from somebody with rocks. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally with rocks, and they got the guy out of the thing. I think they're in for a fight, but I think that that's their plan. I think that they're convinced they're going to win in Yemen, and they'll either install a client state or actually annex the land, and then they'll move on. I don't think it's necessarily going to play out that way, but I think that's their plan.
So, of course, with the conflict in Iraq and Syria going on against ISIS, and now with Saudi Arabia, if you look at the map, you'll see that Qatar is just a little peninsula, more or less, that's in the Persian Gulf, and it's kind of really close to Iran. What we've been reporting on the anti-media, we've got a great foreign policy writer, Darius, who covers foreign policy for us. We've been following what's been happening with Iran for a very long time, between the United States and Iran, because let's face it, that's the big neocon jewel. That's what they want. They want Iran, and a lot of this other stuff, I think Syria and Iraq and a lot of the other stuff that happens, Afghanistan, a lot of it has to do with containing Iran or encircling Iran and stuff like that. It seems like the Trump regime is definitely going full neocon when it comes to being anti-Iran. And a lot of the rhetoric coming out with this whole Saudi-Qatar crisis is somehow pinning extremism and terrorism on Iran. Now, I think especially the people who are aware of things, and this includes even the people over on the alt-right, a lot of people know that Saudi Arabia is the main driver behind ISIS and Al-Qaeda type of terrorism. And so when people like Saudi Arabia say, oh, well, we can't be friends with Qatar because they're supporting terrorism with Iran, I think that kind of rings on deaf ears. Because people are like, what are you guys talking about? You guys are the ones funding terrorism, not Qatar, not Iran. Like, we all know that Saudi Arabia is doing it. A lot of people think that. But I feel like a lot of this stuff just is more and more just a encircling and a demonization and just kind of building up the propaganda base to deal with or to justify some type of major action against Iran. I don't know. I doubt it would be an actual invasion, just because that would be very, 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 very costly in many ways. But I feel like there's a propaganda war going on against Iran, maybe to justify a strike against their nuclear capabilities. I don't know what exactly it is. But Justin, I wanted to get your take on how this plays with Qatar, Saudi Arabia. How does this play in with Iran, in your opinion?
Well, as far as Iran goes, they want it. They want the government gone. They want their own. They want to install their own client there. As far as the U.S., that's their goal. The Saudis actually have the same goal because of the Sunni Shia thing. Both of them are going to have to put that goal on hold for a very long time, because if you were to take out Iran, then if that government collapses, then from the border, from Iran through Iraq and into Syria, you don't have a functioning government. And while that sounds great to these conventional war guys, in reality, you've just created 1,000 insurgent and terrorist groups that are each going to try to carve out their own little country. So I think their plan is to take out the government. And I think it has been, well, we know it has been since the whole thing with the Shah. But
yeah, this goes back. This is the United States has overthrown the government of Iran before. This won't be the first time it's try to do it again.
And I don't think that I don't think it's going to work out this time either.
Right.
Yeah, and it didn't work out last time. This is, the last time we did this was when Iran had a democratically elected guy who went to Harvard. He went back. He was a Iranian dude. Came to the U.S. Got educated. Went to Harvard. Went back. Ran for president. Won the election in Iran. And then started doing a bunch of reforms, including I think he was doing the main trigger for our CIA operations overthrowing the government was that he nationalized the oil industry of Iran, which was mostly owned by by the British, and then also owned by the U.S. And then we're like, okay, they need some democracy and freedom now. And then we went and we put in a dictatorship that we picked, and I guess somehow that was bringing them democracy. But anyway, we did that before. And the reason when they had the Islamic Revolution, the reason now why there's the government of Iran, even though it is more moderate than Saudi Arabia, it is hardline and it is very anti-American. Well, obviously they have a reason to be. The last time there was a government there, it was placed by the United States. So I guess there's a reason why they would be a little skeptical of what we were doing over there. So, again, it goes to this idea where you wind up with a bunch of blowback when you go and try to electioneer other countries. Sooner or later, even if we were successful in, let's say we bombed out the Iranian government, we backed and financed a coup or whatever, and we had a government, sooner or later the blowback comes in and the people there say, screw this. We're not going to allow this American-backed government to take all of our resources and do what they want with our oil or whatever, and it's going to blow back again. And so we can't allow ourselves to keep repeating history. Someone brought up a really great point on my Facebook feed the other day. It's, when is the last time we can say an Iranian guy committed a terror attack, not only in the United States, but basically anywhere? When was the last time an Iranian did an attack in France or in the UK or in the United States? So we're going around, and Trump recently said that Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism and stuff. Where is it at?
You can actually take that a step further. You can take that a step further and ask the question: when was the last time we had a Shia, period, commit a terrorist attack against the United States? An actual terrorist attack, not part of the insurgency in Iraq, but an actual terrorist attack, and it was in 1983. But we're funding the other guys, so I mean, whatever.
It's just
the other guys. Trey, go ahead, dude.
It baffles me how, like you guys said, we keep doing the same thing, and it's all part of the same regime change game. And yet nobody has woken up to the fact that we've done this before. Everyone gets all excited when there's news that we're close to achieving whatever they say our goal is. This is the same song and dance we've seen 1,000 times over. And it's not going to work out. As Albert Einstein said, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So, like Justin said, we're just going to keep running into the same problems as long as we keep trying to use the same methods to deal with them. So until we just give up on this whole regime change game and trying to take resources from all these countries, we're not going to get anywhere.
And for that to happen, we need a dramatic shift in the way our just American culture functions.
Mm-hmm.
If we continue having this centralized way of doing things where politicians get to pick and choose whatever the hell they want to do, and there's very little accountability, well then the guys that are in a position to make a bunch of money off of political decisions are going to continue to influence and control what's going on. And let's face it, in my opinion anyway, most of the foreign policy stuff is done in a for-profit kind of fashion for companies to make a bunch of money. Because unlike previous empires that have existed, going back to one of our problems with foreign policy, our empire is not honest. We have a big empire. We have military bases all around the world, and we're telling ourselves that, oh, we're there for freedom and we're there to protect, keep the peace and stuff. It's an empire. Like, let's be honest. I think we'd be more effective if we said, you know what? Yeah, we're going to invade countries and take their shit, and we're going to make ourselves rich. And Americans are going to get the treasure of toppling governments. And then I think there'd be, it would be more effective anyway. But the way they do it now, they have a empire and they pretend they don't. And therefore it can't function the way an empire should function. And then at the same time, it doesn't function the way that a regular peaceful government should function. And so we're caught in this area of dysfunction where all of the costs are socialized and everybody has to pay for it. You and me have to go buy these bombs, and then these companies get to make the bombs and profit off of them, and they privatize it. So it's capitalism for the rich and socialism. Sorry, I got that backwards. It's basically socialism for the rich while privatizing it, and then capitalism for us. We get to pay for all this shit. It's just so crazy. It's so backwards, and it's so frustrating that people don't seem to care enough about it.
Nick, you're looking for the phrase privatize the profits and socialize the costs.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Exactly.
Yeah.
I was confusing myself there for a second.
I just want to have him follow me around and rephrase everything I said.
Right?
That's good.
Yeah. Accurate.
I'll follow you around. I'm fine with that.
I'd follow Justin around.
Now it's a little creepy. Okay. No.
No.
All right. So the Middle East is going to hell in a handbasket, and we're kind of feeling it. We're adding fuel to the fire. So this is an area of coverage that the anti-media has been focusing on relentlessly, dude. We've got, not only do we have two dedicated writers focusing in on foreign policy, both in the Middle East and then in Asia, but we're also aggregating almost everything coming out from antiwar.com, and we've got several other websites that we're putting content up that are covering this foreign policy stuff, because this is, to me, there's two big issues that I really care about that don't get enough attention. One is obviously the foreign policy, the war on terror, all the military interventions we have going on. The second, of course, is the war on drugs, which you guys all know is a huge area of interest for me. But it's not isolated to the Middle East or Asia, because now shit is getting crazy in Venezuela too. And I guess it's been kind of quiet in the Western Hemisphere when it comes to the U.S. interventions and stuff. I guess there was the Honduran coup in 2009 that the U.S. kind of signed off on as well. But it has been kind of quiet. But I wanted to get your take, Justin, first on what's going on in Venezuela, because there's so many conflicting reports. I feel like Venezuela, it's kind of like trying to find out what's going on in Syria, where everything is so propagandized from both sides of the conflict that you can't really tell what's going on. If you go and look at Telesur or other outlets like that, you're going to see a very pro-Venezuelan government narrative. And then if you go look at kind of U.S.-based news outlets, you're going to see a very anti-Venezuelan government perspective. Justin, what do you think is going on down in Venezuela? Because it's pretty close to home, but very little is known about the true happenings going on there?
We've got two people that follow it and write about it pretty extensively, and they don't agree. From what I can tell, from where I'm sitting, what it looks like is the same old song and dance. You know, you had the true believer come in and try to establish that form of government, and then the next guy kind of screwed everything up, and then the U.S. made it worse with economic sanctions, and then the people got angry. And then he's trying quick fixes and Band-Aid fixes to stave off the inevitable revolution. I think I would like to think, I don't have the faith I used to, I would like to think that U.S. intelligence is smart enough to know if they just let this play out, they'll actually end up organically, they'll end up with an ally. If they meddle, I think that I think they'll screw it up. Like it's one of those things where if they're hands off, I think a revolution will occur, and I think it will be friendly to the U.S. I think if they go down there and stick their nose into it, then it's going to provide the fuel to say, Uncle Sam did all of this. It was the Yankees. They started the whole problem. And then you're going to get a government that's even further removed from the U.S. Now, as far as what the masters of the universe up there in Langley are going to do, I have no idea because they've lost touch with reality. So,
yeah, dude, that's a great point, and I tend to lean that way on a lot of these conflicts. The U.S., if it were to just let things play out, would be a lot better off. And this is something that should be talked about here because people tend to make extremes and they want to choose a team. And so one thing I've noticed in our movement is there's a lot of people who are like, oh, Putin is awesome and Putin is like the anti-globalist and he's like the guy that's like, he's just like, he's like kicking our ass and stuff. And yeah, maybe some of that's true. But just because Putin is opposed to the U.S., agenda going on, I don't know, in Syria and the Middle East and elsewhere, doesn't make him a good guy. Just because Venezuela is a anti-Western, anti-American government doesn't mean the Venezuelan government is like awesome or anything like that either.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I think most people can realize is if they take off the lens of the team of their choice is that most of these governments are pretty crappy in their own ways. The Venezuelan government is crappy in its own way. The Russian government is crappy in its own way. And, of course, the United States government, who we focus on the most because we are U.S. citizens and we live here, we have to deal with this place, is obviously, has its own shortcomings in many, many ways. And so that's one thing I think that we need to keep in mind is that there isn't really, in many of these conflicts, there isn't really a good guy. There's just a bad guy. And that's one of the things that I think we need to be very aware of. Trey, I want to go back to you, man. We're running out of time here. We've got about a minute left. What are some of your final thoughts on some of this foreign policy stuff with the United States and what we're doing around the world?
That's a very broad question. It's like I'm gonna go back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast. It's very troubling for me as someone who still has a lot of life yet to live and has to deal with everything that's going on from here until whenever it stops or whenever we finally figure this shit out. It's troubling for me. I look at all this stuff and I'm looking for ways we can deal with it, and I'm just not finding one. I think it's turned into a beast that's now too big to handle without it working itself out, and that's worrying because that usually means a lot of bloodshed and things like that. So it's scary, but I mean, we'll just have to see where it goes.
Yo, here we go through the stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.
JJ Inc. from Against the Wall, and you're listening to UCY.TV.